Hogwarts, Muggle Fraudster Outshines Wizards with Deception. Like, share and subscribe. Episode 61. The second ability enhanced by the Twisted Demon Eye is a very straightforward distortion. But it's not limited to twisted matter. The rules, the goal, the temperature, the gravity, the rules of everything that exists are within the scope of distortion. With the support of spiritual power, Lewis can even reverse the properties of magma to make it grow flowers, and twist the nature of fire to freeze other substances. This near-omnipotent nature is a magic eye enhanced by the Eye of Fate observation as a product of the Fate lottery. But the mental power required to maintain the distortion effect is really terrifying. Lewis tried to reverse the nature of the flames, confirmed the consumption of mental power, and found that he could only last half an hour. This is only a small flame, and if it is a large area of lava, it is estimated that it can only last a few seconds of nature distortion. Forget it, the ability is so against the sky, steal the fun. Lewis shook his head and grabbed his toiletries for the bathroom. He is going to continue to use Dragon's Blood Shower Gel and Concentrated Mental Mutagen. Is there anything more torturous in this world than a midnight class? Lewis packed up his textbooks, grabbed the required scratch paper and quill pens, prepared a thickened coat, and yawned and went out. But this is also something that cannot be helped. With the astronomical conditions of Hogwarts, it is only at midnight when you can see the starry sky accurately. Since it is already midnight, the so-called curfew naturally has no effect, which can be described as a legal night tour. Led by the cursing Filch, a group of students snaked to the location of the astronomy tower with oil lamps like a long fire snake. "Luis, good evening." After a while, Hermione came to Lewis's side with a worried expression. "Are you all right?" "Me? What can I do?" Lewis asked rhetorically. "Why didn't you tell me about your broom getting out of control?" Hermione complained. "I still heard Padma say that you fell into the defense against the dark arts classroom, and several people sitting by the window were not lightly injured. That's a trifle. Thanks to the blessing of those unlucky eggs, I wasn't hurt." Lewis spread his hands. "You see, I'm healthy. But I still hope you can share these things with me. After all, we are friends." Hermione said. "Well, what you said makes sense." Lewis nodded. The September night breeze already had a chill, and a gust of wind blew through, and the thinly dressed Hermione shivered. "Why don't you wear more when you come out so late?" Lewis said as he draped the clothes he had prepared over Hermione. "Don't freeze, think about the raw materials in potions class, even magical potions are probably not delicious." "Thank you." Hermione wrapped in warm clothes, her little face reddened in thanks. Soon, the students arrived at the observatory, where the astronomy professor, Aurora Sinista, had already arrived and was adjusting the telescope. "Everyone, astronomy is a very important subject. We need to observe the orbit of the planets, which is very important for you to study other subjects in the future." Aurora Sinista said to the students, "Now let's teach you to identify the main planets." Wizards' astronomy classes are not much different from Muggle astronomy classes, and the professor teaches to draw the position of the planets on paper, but with some more magical symbolism. This kind of knowledge has become common knowledge in the Muggle world, and only wizards need to learn. Through the convex lens at the top of the astronomy tower, the starry sky comes into view, which is not something that the Muggle world can see. Lewis looked at the sky, and the starlight under his eyes seemed to reflect the stars in the sky. "Lewis, you know Uranus?" Hermione, who was on the side, looked up to ask Lewis a question. The soft moonlight shone on Lewis's handsome face, and between the fluffy brown hair, you could see his deep eyes that seemed to completely incorporate the starry sky under his eyes, beautiful and mysterious. Hermione was stunned for a long time until Lewis looked down at her. "Hermione, what did you just ask me?" Lewis asked. "Nothing. It's nothing." Hermione replied subconsciously, lowering her head to write and draw on the paper, hiding her heart and red face. Lewis shrugged, not understanding what was wrong with Hermione, and he continued to look up at the sky as if he had seen some kind of revelation in it. Dolly Oriental, gathering sand into a tower, stagnant water into an abyss. Lewis muttered the sentence that naturally appeared in his mind. The Eye of Fate observation has a special ability, which is to grant the holder all prophetic talents. From fortune-telling, to stargazing, from tarot cards to crystal balls, and even primitive burnt tortoise shells are included. And just when Lewis looked up at the starry sky, he had a feeling of whim, as if he saw what he should do to be best for him. Dolly Oriental. Chi magic? Lewis looked at his body, and through his body, he saw the chi magic seed floating near his heart. In addition to the soul, his body is now estimated to be a thing that can be counted as an Oriental thing. He really didn't care much about this thing since he got it, and he had planned to try it to see if it could help brew potions during the next potions class, but he really didn't pay attention to the rest. He still has some knowledge about chi magic in his mind, all of which come with this chi magic seed. "It seems that I will have to find time to practice chi magic in the future," Lewis muttered to himself, and suddenly his expression became strange. He suddenly recalled the spellcasting process of the righteous mage father when he watched the anime in the past. It's a lizard again, it's a pufferfish, and there are godlike rituals and weird spells, which affect the image a little. Lewis felt a pain in his brain just thinking about it. As for the so-called gathering sand into a tower and stagnant water into an abyss in the back, Lewis does not understand it very well, and the literal meaning seems to mean that there will be gains over time. But chi magic is not magic, compared to the magic of this world is too conservative, there is no such magical feeling, the power is not comparable to the magic eye, and the weird is not comparable to illusion, what is its effect? Lewis was puzzled, but decided to give it a try. Idle is idle anyway, Hogwarts schoolwork is not heavy. After astronomy class, Professor Sinista had just finished her homework when Hermione ran away and rushed out. Lewis, who was originally going to say hello to Hermione, looked at Hermione's running back and did not react for a while. This is... in a hurry to go to the bathroom? Lewis looked at Hermione's back suspiciously. Episode 62. In the following time, Lewis spent the rest of his time trying to cultivate chi magic in addition to normal classes. The so-called cultivation is actually learning, and chi magic is not a cultivation system with clear hierarchies step by step, but a method of progress through knowledge and experience. The more knowledge and experience, the stronger your chi magic effects and abilities. But the process of learning chi magic. In a word, in order to prevent himself from leaving that person seems to have some serious illness assessment, Lewis plans to go to the demand room first, and then study in this place where no one disturbs. The room of necessity is located in a corridor on the 8th floor of the castle that few people pass through, because the harsh trigger conditions make it rarely discovered. But not for nothing, in fact, several professors have entered here, and even Filch has been looking for cleaning tools to enter here. But it's not that difficult for a traverser. Today is the weekend, there is no need to go to class, and the students who have played for a week are gathered in the library to catch up on their homework, leaving the library overcrowded. It didn't matter to Lewis, but he was more concerned about why Hermione hadn't come to him lately, and it was like avoiding him a few times. Awkward? But why? Lewis was puzzled, and in the end he could only conclude that Hermione had not been in a good mood lately. You can't find yourself a little shy to suddenly like me, do you? Lewis reminisced about the time he spent with Hermione. It's too short to get along, and there is no too outrageous communication, right? Soon Lewis put these thoughts behind him, because he had found the entrance to the room of demand. Trolls Beat the Silly Barnabas is a painting of 8 spicy-eyed trolls and ballerina, holding sticks and beating the wizard in the middle of the picture. It is said that it was a foolish wizard named Barnabas who tried to teach a group of trolls to dance ballet. I don't know what this wizard named Barnabas went through to come up with such a spicy idea. Lewis looked away and looked at the wall opposite the tapestry. There doesn't seem to be any problem with this wall, and if it weren't for the plot beforehand, he wouldn't have imagined that behind this wall there would be a room that could change according to the needs of the user. Lewis unleashed his psychic power in an attempt to penetrate the walls and probe inside. But he did not succeed, even if he used the concentrated spirit inducer 3 times, the spiritual power radiation range had reached 500 meters, and the strength could not see through the seemingly ordinary wall even if it reached more than 500 pounds. This wall is truly unusual. The way to enter the room is simple, but it is not easy to open it by chance, that is, to silently remember what you need in your heart and pass by this wall 3 times. If it is to practice chi magic, Lewis only needs to silently recite a suitable place to brew potions, because the ritual required to practice chi magic is no different from brewing potions. But Lewis felt that it was all coming, and he simply solved everything. So he silently chanted in his heart, the secret room where things are hidden. After passing by the wall opposite the spicy-eyed tapestry of Trolls Stick Beat Silly Barnabas 3 times in a row, a door slowly appeared in front of Lewis. At the same time, Lewis also saw the system's prompt. You found the room of demand. You activated the challenge mission, Fool the Room of Demand. Task requirement, make responding house error. Mission reward, open perfect level lottery. Lewis blinked, surprised and a little depressed at the same time. Surprisingly, he finally found the 3rd level of the lottery, the perfect level, the level between the boutique level and the legendary level. Frustrated, he didn't understand how to fool a room. Let's put it aside for now, fooling the room of demand, which requires careful thinking. Lewis pushed open the sleek door and entered the secret room where things were hidden. The room is so large that it looks almost larger than the castle's auditorium, and it's hard to imagine that there are rooms larger than the auditorium in the castle. This should be the traceless extension charm? Lewis's gaze swept over the debris and looked at the surrounding walls. The traceless extension charm, one of the unreasonable spells of the Harry Potter world. It can carve out huge spaces and tight spaces such as suitcases, large enough to raise animals, and magically set up the weather as a resort. The outrageous thing is that the weight of the box remains unchanged and can be carried away by people at will. I really carry a piece of land, a home, with me. Theoretically, the traceless extension charm, like its name, can be expanded indefinitely, so this secret room where things are hidden won't fill up at all. So how many people have found the room of demand? Or do you just treat this place as a secret room and don't know what it does? Lewis walked among the clutter piled up to the ceiling, and in his eyes, there were occasional broken illusory threads on these debris. Those are the relationships that connect these objects to their owners, where they fall to dust, and most of those owners have passed away. One of the compensation that Lewis asked Dumbledore for, commonly known as the power to pick up trash, is actually for this place. Don't look at the shabby things here as if they are really rubbish, but in fact, there are many rare boutiques in the outside world, and under those real garbage, there may be good things that have not been damaged. Although Lewis's family is quite rich, it is not a matter of exchanging British pounds for galleons all the time, and Lewis plans to earn some galleons from this utility room in the room of demand. It can be said that this is a gold mine waiting to be developed, but unfortunately no one has noticed its value, and then it was burned by a fierce fire, which is too wasteful. In addition to the items that no owner can sell at will, there are many items whose owners are not dead, or are not dead clean, and they may attach great importance to some items and are willing to pay a lot of money to buy them. For example, a Horcrux left behind by a certain Mr. Dark Lord. Ravenclaw crown. Lewis looked at the delicate silver crown worn on the Rowena Ravenclaw statue not far away, and slowly spat out a word. Legend has it that you can get command when you wear it, and was later tainted by Voldemort to make a legendary item into a Horcrux. But improving intelligence is a matter of opinion, at least Voldemort was not attracted to this effect. Lewis muttered closer to the crown, cautiously not reaching out. Voldemort's Horcruxes, the devil knows if there are any vicious curses or evil magic on them. Lewis is not a heroic, no, brave, belt, brainless fearful, son, savior, his life is very expensive. Whether it was the power of spiritual power or the power of the chicken charm, Lewis felt uneasy, so he took a rag from the side that he didn't know how many years old and tied it to the silver crown, and then reached out to lift the crown up. That's foolproof. Lewis smiled triumphantly. Episode 63, Voldemort? That's it? Given that the Ravenclaw crown was Voldemort's Horcrux and had Voldemort's split soul on it, Lewis had no intention of putting him in the storage space, which is why he was so troublesome. Although the soul is very honest in the original book, there is not the slightest sign of activity, but Lewis does not dare to guarantee that there is not the slightest problem with this thing. What if some inexplicable phantom limb grows and moves his things? His things were so precious that if they were broken, he couldn't afford to sell Voldemort and the Death Eaters in a package. In order not to be found on the way back with the Ravenclaw crown on his hand, Lewis found a pile of fabric and sundries to wrap it. This process will inevitably let the dust on the debris that I don't know how many years have not been cleaned to this crown, but anyway, it has been put for decades, and the eldest brother does not say the second brother, there is a lot of ash, so what do you pay attention to? He doesn't wear this thing anyway. Finally, Lewis also found a large piece of dragon skin in a chest, which is a good material for blocking magic, and Hogwarts taught students the role and importance of dragon skin protective gloves when teaching students to deal with herbs and magical materials. Such a large piece can sell for at least 50 galleons, right? Having such a thing wrapped around Crown Lewis was much more relieved. Before leaving the room dedicated to storing sundries in the room of requirement, Lewis thought for a moment and left a teleportation mark on a broken crystal ball before leaving the mysterious room. After going out, still seeing the tapestry of spicy eyes in front of him, Lewis looked back and saw that the door behind him quickly disappeared, returning to the appearance of a wall without the slightest sign that it had a door. The magic of this world really doesn't make sense. Lewis sighed softly and left the hallway. Carrying the well-packed crown, Lewis returned to the dormitory. There was no one else in the dormitory, don't get me wrong, they were not scared away by Lewis, but went to watch the Slytherin Quidditch team train on the Quidditch training ground. Just as no one happened, Lewis twisted the inside and outside of the door with the demon eye of causal distortion at the repaired door, so that anyone who walked through the door into the room would find themselves walking out. After confirming that it was correct, Lewis pushed away the coquettish Fafnir, opened the tightly wrapped dragonskin bag and threw the grey Ravenclaw crown on the table. Horcruxes. The most important plot prop in the Harry Potter world, the biggest reason why Voldemort can't kill, and the Horcrux will hardly be destroyed, and the only known thing that can destroy the Horcrux is the venom of the basilisk, the fire curse. The death spell can destroy the soul fragments on Harry Potter's body but cannot destroy the Horcruxes, because Harry is just an accident, there is no complete preparation ceremony, and the soul fragments on his body are caused by the damage of the magic counterattack. The Gryffindor sword does not destroy Horcruxes, at least not temporarily, only when it is contaminated with the blood and poison of the basilisk. And the basilisk is still living in the secret room. Lewis went to look for it. Unless he forcibly demolished the outer layer, he can't go down. So logically speaking, Voldemort's Horcrux is invincible for the time being, but the reason is most afraid of encountering another truth. I don't know if my best sword in the country can split the Horcruxes. It stands to reason that this thing can be slashed without anything within the scope of a country. Lewis pulled out the most ornate of the series of swords and compared it on the Horcrux. Hogwarts does not belong to any city, nor to any village town, where only the effect of the national good sword can be activated. But the effects of the series of sword sets are all against matter, and although this national good sword can destroy the Ravenclaw crown protected by evil magic, it is not for Voldemort's soul. But Lewis seemed to ignore this, and he picked up the sword of the country and slashed it at the Ravenclaw crown. Suddenly, a pitch-black mist erupted from the crown, and the mist seemed to swallow all the light, and the darkness made it impossible to see the surrounding things. And in that mist, Lewis, who was holding the sword of the country, saw the illusory light and shadow and the hoarse evil voice tempting him in his ears. Put on me, and you will gain infinite wisdom, become a being comparable to Rowena Ravenclaw, and you will gain endless glory and countless treasures. The light and shadow transformed into the appearance of Lewis, wearing a Ravenclaw crown and countless galleons and treasures at his feet, and Hogwarts professors gathered around him to sing the praises of his wisdom society. That's it? Lewis tilted his head. There's no invincible power or something? The black mist paused, surged again, and the light and shadow changed for a while, finally forming a picture of defeating Dumbledore with a wand. Put on me, you will gain infinite wisdom, no powerful magical knowledge, learn powerful magic, even Dumbledore is not your opponent. The voice continued to seduce. That's it? Lewis pouted disdainfully. What's the use of being powerful? It's not lonely yet, it's not interesting. The black mist stuck again, like a gear in a smooth-moving machine, stuck for a long time, before it surged again. Since ancient times beauty loves heroes, great power will make you gain the respect of everyone, and you will win the favor of all women. The light and shadow appeared again, and one by one beautiful, scantily clad women scratched their heads around themselves wearing crowns, and many familiar appearances could be seen in them. But Lewis was more concerned that the voice sounded a little impatient and became a little weak. That's it? Lewis grinned. Enough. Put on me. I will make all your wishes come true. The voice in the black mist became furious, and the black mist surged as if there were monsters rolling inside. Seeing that the temptation could not be done, the threat began, and this sudden change of black fog and terrible sound will increase the pressure on the people in the black fog, and an 11-year-old child cannot carry it. But Lewis is not an 11-year-old child. Even if he looks at the body alone, he can overturn the tank with one hand, tear the tiger and crack the leopard. Can he be scared by the kung fu of your three-legged cat? And what are the temptations before? Can only grasp the desire of the subconscious mind to fabricate information. You take this to test the cadres? What cadre cannot afford such a test? Lewis wanted to take out what he had prepared for Voldemort so that he could see what a threat was, but given that he hadn't drained the value of this Voldemort yet, there was little point in intimidating too early. What Lewis prepared was Medge's soul-stealing scroll. Although the national good sword can destroy Voldemort's Horcrux carrier but cannot handle Voldemort's soul fragments, when the time comes, use the soul-stealing scroll to suck, clean and environmentally friendly. But that's the last resort, and as for why don't you deal with this Horcrux for the time being? Where? There is a connection between the remnant soul of the Horcrux and the body, but this connection is broken after Voldemort dies once and becomes a remnant soul, so every Voldemort remnant soul is undeveloped, and the best fraud point extraction machine. Shouldn't this be offered with good words first, and then disposed of after the value is drained? What? Tell Dumbledore? Impossible, absolutely impossible. What's the point of telling Dumbledore directly? There is no surprise at all, and telling him at the critical moment is not another fraud point. Just when he was in a hurry because he couldn't find a Horcrux, he suddenly told him, the Horcrux is here. Isn't it surprising? Not a surprise? Plan through. Episode 64, What? I am a descendant of Merlin's bloodline? I think your technique could be more delicate, maybe more tempting, rather than such crude coercion and inducement. Lewis ignored the billowing black mist and angry words, and said slowly. Everyone is a smart person, there is no need to make such a mess of yourself. This time, the black fog officially dissipated, and the surrounding cold environment returned to normal, leaving only the Ravenclaw crown quietly on the table. Fafnir lay shivering in the cage, seemingly frightened by the scene just now. What are you? A weak voice came from the Ravenclaw crown. Do you know who I am? You know, I know this too well, the great Dark Lord, only a wizard weaker than Dumbledore. Lewis said deliberately. I am the strongest wizard, Dumbledore. Dumbledore is just a bad old man, and I have long since escaped the chase of death. I am the most powerful wizard. Inside the crown, the remnants of Voldemort's soul were particularly excited, and the sound of the roar startled Fafnir. You can save yourself the effort, Lewis soothed Fafnir. Look at your current state. Are you funny? A roar seemed to weaken Voldemort's remnant soul, and he paused for a long time before saying, You know what, I'm a magic powerful enough to escape death, and no one can kill me as long as I exist. The Ravenclaw crown is still different from the diary, and the diary can communicate with the outside world in a simpler and low-cost way, but the crown can only rely on itself, listening to the sound as if Voldemort is going to lose his breath at any time. Is it? But what does this have to do with you? He does not die, but you have to bear the pain of losing your freedom, Lewis said maliciously. We are one. But not anymore, don't you also notice? Your consciousness has been freed from the shackles of the body, and your body is dead, killed by a newborn boy. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. I am the Dark Lord, I am Voldemort. I can't die. Voldemort became agitated again this time and even briefly lost his voice. You can take it easy, if you are angry with yourself, you will not be saved. Lewis chuckled twice. What's more, you should be happy when the body is dead. Why are you so angry? Happy? Are you provoking me? Voldemort's voice was so badly distorted that it didn't seem to last long. Why don't you want to think about what it means that the body is dead? Does that mean you have the opportunity to become an ontology? Lewis smiled, moved his eyes, and looked at the system prompt. Your twisting ability fooled a minor wizard, effect out. You have earned 500 fraud points, the current number is 7,420. Someone went back to the dormitory and triggered a door that was twisted inside and out, looking scared enough. Well, that's the end of today's chat, you can think about what I said. Despite Voldemort's loud objections, Lewis once again wrapped him up in a dragonskin bag and kicked him under the bed. Then he turned and walked to the door, lifting the twisting power. Outside the door, a slightly familiar black boy had a frightened expression at this time, and he saw Lewis as if he was fried. This man. It seems to be a roommate, right? Lewis touched his chin and asked, what's your name? Blaise Zabini. The black boy had a humiliated look on his face. Oh, sorry, we didn't communicate much so I didn't remember your name. Lewis shrugged. I was just studying magic, so I sealed the door and hope it didn't scare you. This is meaningless, after all, judging from the fraud points and the description of the impact on him, he is very frightened. It's okay. Blaise Zabini took a deep breath to suppress his emotions, and with a haughty personality, he said with difficulty, your magic is very powerful. SOSO, the main thing is that I am confident and my learning ability is great. Lewis said casually. Amazing. Blaise Zabini nodded to take you to the shot, and his body walked past Lewis a little stiffly. I do think you're more amazing, you're the one I talk to the most in Slytherin, what's the matter? Don't you hate mudbloods? Lewis said the word very calmly. This surprised Blaise Zabini, who was silent for a while and said, I am a noble pure blood, and I hate people who turn their backs on blood, but I still have respect for lost bloodlines. Lost bloodline? Lewis raised an eyebrow. Looks like something happened that I didn't know. Everyone outside is saying that you have nightmare bloodlines on your body. Blaise Zabini said, that's the bloodline of the legendary mage Merlin. They say that you are not a Muggle wizard at all, but a descendant of noble blood. But noble blood will also appear squib, and after generations of inheritance, there may be descendants who do not know wizards at all. So you are the descendant of the squib, but that is also a squib from the noble bloodline, which is why there is a genius wizard like you. Boy. Lewis, who heard this, narrowed his eyes. As the saying goes, if you can't fight, you can join, but what if the enemy's lineup can't be added? Then divide the enemy's camp into your own camp and everything will be fine? The wizarding world has always been made by purebloods, and this group of little wizards from pureblood families learned quite professionally, playing the bells and whistles of making rules. Lewis himself seems to be an insider. Admittedly, this is a self-deception, but there will always be people who believe that the student who provoked the Slytherin by one person is actually a descendant of a noble bloodline. To elevate an opponent after being beaten up by someone else is to elevate yourself, and it seems that the people of Slytherin still listen to wisdom. But why do I have to operate this thing myself? Lewis pouted quietly, otherwise, how else can I earn points? What bullshit Merlin bloodline is undoubtedly a lie, but if you make all wizards in the wizarding world believe this lie, taking Lewis is undoubtedly completing a grand fraud, and the points are not earned softly? So Lewis said to the black guy with a smile, I didn't expect that I was hidden so deeply by you, and I originally planned to get along with you as an ordinary person in exchange for alienation. Yes, I am a descendant of Merlin and I have a showdown. Episode 65, Catch a small animal and feed the Dark Lord. Detection of fraud with high growth. Trigger phase quest, Nightmare and the Wizard. Mission phase 1, convince Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff House students that you are a descendant of Merlin's bloodline. Mission completion rewards twice the number of fraud points at this stage. Mission phase 2, convince Slytherin House students that you are Merlin's bloodline. Complete the mission to get the perfect draw free 10 consecutive draws. This reward is worth 20,000 fraud points. Mission Stage 3, make Albus Dumbledore believe that you are a descendant of Merlin's bloodline. Mission completion rewards achievements. Scammers who laugh at justice. Non-black magic effects are reduced by 50%. Legends draw 3 times. This reward is worth 30,000 fraud points. Mission Stage 4. Let the International Confederation of Wizards recognize the identity of your Merlin bloodline descendant. Mission completion bonus achievement. Man of the Fraud World. 100% bonus for fraud point acquisition. Legendary draw 10 times. At the moment when Lewis said that he was a descendant of Merlin's bloodline, a large number of prompts burst out in front of Lewis's eyes, instantly filling Lewis's vision. It took Lewis a long time to read all the tips in front of him. There is no doubt that this is a rewarding and challenging task, and the difficulties of the first and second stages are at the top of the box, and the third and fourth stages are top-notch. Fortunately, rewards are not settled at once, and each stage has its own rewards. But Slytherin will actually be ranked in the second stage alone, and sure enough, only the people who wronged you know how wronged you are, and those who kill you think that you really don't have this level. Lewis sneered twice in his heart. Ignoring the strange-looking Bressabini, Louise turned and took Fafnir out the door. After injecting the first gene enhancement agent, Fafnir injected a second and third one after another, and it is not clear what the physical strength is. Anyway, it is not comparable to Lewis, if you are intellectual. I can't see it, but it should have risen a little. After all, the head is big, and the brain should be bigger. The common room was packed with Slytherin students rushing homework, and because the library was overcrowded, many had to catch up on homework in the common room. But even in the effort of rushing homework, they did not forget to point at Lewis, and from time to time Merlin popped out of his mouth, nightmare, and so on. These can be tolerated, but it is too much to pop up if so astringent in these words. Then the shortcomings of the legendary Merlin are too much on him, right? Lewis looked up at the Slytherin student who said astringently, it seemed to be a second year, the experience was severe or too little, first mark a hand, and send him a nightmare of a red-pink skull at night. Lewis did not choose to use illusion directly, which is not very consistent with the nightmare bloodline, or until the evening, it is better to sit on the name of the so-called dream demon bloodline and Merlin bloodline. In the future, he will treat himself as a descendant of Merlin's bloodline. Lewis came to the courtyard, and the lead-colored sky looked a little oppressive. Lewis raised his hand to Fafnir, who was obviously stronger for more than a circle, and said to it, Fafnir, go to the Forbidden Forest and catch some small animals out, smaller ones, remember. Fafnir answered Lewis with a powerful cry and nodded at him. Very well, go ahead. As soon as Lewis raised his hand to release Fafnir, this Fafnir became larger and gained a lot of weight. If it were not for the bull charm to support him, it's going to be impossible to bring Fafnir. Looking at Fafnir, who spread his wings and flew away like a bomber, Lewis suddenly noticed a white owl that was almost knocked over by Fafnir. It's a little familiar. Lewis watched the owl fall quickly, and stood aggrieved on the shoulder of an eye-eyed boy asking for comfort. Well, no wonder familiar, isn't that Harry Potter's special bird Hedwig? That glasses boy is naturally Harry Potter. Lewis, good afternoon. Harry was quite happy when he saw Lewis, and didn't care at all about his Hedwig almost being knocked over by Fafnir. How was the day? Well, not bad. Lewis nodded casually. Can't I say that I saw the soul fragment of your mortal enemy and talked to him, right? You're here to walk the birds too? Well, I take Hedwig out every day so that it will be in a better mood. Harry scratched the soft hair on Hedwig's neck. That was your owl just now? Did you change the owl? No, that's my Fafnir, recently estimated to have developed a second time and grown up again. Lewis said perfunctorily. 2. Secondary development? Harry blinked his eyes for a moment and didn't understand, and was embarrassed to ask, looking at Fafnir flying in the distance and casually asking, where is it going? Forbidden Forest, I want him to catch me some small animals back. Lewis said, catch small animals? Do what? Harry was curious. Well, I'm useful. Lewis was embarrassed to say that it was used to feed Voldemort. Although the remnants of the Ravenclaw crown are immortal, the Horcrux thing cannot have its own communication effect, and that Voldemort demon consumes soul power every time he speaks. So Lewis plans to catch some critters and feed Voldemort with their souls so that he can listen to himself 2 more words. There is a saying that the more you say, the more wrong you are, unless you don't plan to tell the truth at all, and there is no flaw in your logic. Lewis intends to guide him to become an idealistic and ambitious Voldemort in the process of talking to Voldemort. This may also make Voldemort schizophrenic, which is not much more fun than killing Voldemort. This idea should not be difficult to implement. Lewis felt that he had tricked a Voldemort Ravenclaw demon into being captured. After a while, a loud cry was heard in the distance, and Fafnir's particularly recognizable body flew back from a distance, as if he was still grasping something under his paws. Fafnir is back? Harry put his hand on the pergola and looked over. What did it grab and come back? Lewis also looked over from a distance, but because of the light, he couldn't see it very clearly. I don't know. It seems to be quite big. Then the Eye of Fate observation, the twisted demon eye, and the Eye of Reincarnation of the Bull Badge actually do not have the ability to see from a distance, which is really shameful. As Fafnir flew closer, Lewis and Harry's expressions grew stranger. Isn't that a little too big? Yes, and it doesn't seem to be dead yet, it's still moving. How do I look a bit like a crab? How can there be crabs in the Forbidden Forest? Finally, the joyful Fafnir let out an excited cry and hovered above Harry and Lewis's heads, and now the two saw what Fafnir was buckling. Oh my god! What a big spider, crouch! Eight-Eyed Giant Spider Fan, Episode 66, You call the Eight-Eyed Giant Spider a small animal? Harry and Lewis spoke differently, but the feelings they expressed were the same. It's all, what kind of thing is the sleeping groove? The one that was captured by Fafnir was clearly an eight-eyed giant spider. Harry didn't understand what an eight-eyed giant spider was, but Lewis knew it was the offspring of the eight-eyed giant spider raised by Hagrid, highly poisonous. Just one poison is enough. This thing is said to kill a wizard in an instant in a sneak attack in the wild, and the danger rating of the Ministry of Positive Chi Magic is a full 5x, which belongs to the level that can kill wizards and cannot be tamed. You may not know much about it alone, but as long as you know that this thing is rated in Basilisk, you know that it is dangerous. It's just that spiders can't blink, so Basilisk is the natural enemy of eight-eyed giant spiders, naturally weak, but for ordinary wizards and humans, not blinking means that it can constantly stare at its prey for flaws. According to statistics, the wizards killed by this thing are all successful sneak attacks, and in the wild, they can be said to be not far from death when they meet them alone. How can this be called a small animal? But how did such a powerful thing get caught by Fafnir? Lewis narrowed his eyes and looked at Fafnir's body. Fafnir's feathers are still oily and slippery, and there is not a trace of injury on his body. On the other hand, the eight-eyed giant spider is much more miserable, not only a few blind eyes, but also missing arms and legs. In the sky, Fafnir's huge claws, which had become sharp due to genetic enhancement, were embedded in the back of the eight-eyed giant spider, so that no matter how hard he struggled, he could not hurt Fafnir. Seeing that the master was under him, Fafnir, who felt that he had done a great deed, was overjoyed, and with a long groan, he threw the half-dead eight-eyed giant spider down, intending to make the owner happy as well. Sleeping? Lewis saw Fafnir suddenly send his claws, and suddenly felt bad. This silly eagle treated the eight-eyed giant spider as a dead mouse, and couldn't wait to throw it over to invite credit. But that thing is an eight-eyed giant spider, and the fluffy arthropods and bloody eyes look alarming. And how fierce the eight-eyed giant spider is. Seeing that he was thrown down, this invisible eight-eyed giant spider below suddenly waved the remaining limb buffer, and sprayed venom everywhere by the way. Lewis, who hates insects, especially spiders, suddenly got goosebumps, glanced at Harry's frightened expression, and gave Dumbledore face, and smoothly grabbed him and teleported to the side. Harry only felt that he had changed his position in front of him, and then he saw Lewis, whose expression was obviously not quite right, raise his hand and raise a large fireball. "QNMD spider, crawl for the master." With a battle-like roar, Lewis, who has always been polite and elegant, raised the big fireball and threw it out, smashing it into the falling eight-eyed giant spider. "Eight-eyed giant spider, I didn't provoke any of you beforehand. Why did I go out and not see the yellow calendar to be tortured like this?" The unstable huge fireball smashed on the innocent eight-eyed giant spider, and the next moment the fireball burst, and the explosive flame from the dragon charm instantly engulfed the eight-eyed giant spider. Then the fireball burst into a blazing light and detonated in the air, and the fire light from the explosion illuminated the castle courtyard that was dark because of the cloudy sky. Harry silently swallowed his spit and glanced at Lewis, who had regained his grace next to him. I didn't expect Lewis to be so powerful and afraid of spiders as much as Ron, but Lewis and Ron dealt with it differently. Ron chose to escape, Lewis chose to destroy spiders. Lewis with this look is much scarier than the big spider. Harry shivered. The flames dissipated, and a wisp of ash with residual temperature slowly fell from the sky. Lewis breathed a sigh of relief after seeing the eight-eyed giant spider completely wiped out, and looked up at Fafnir, who was thrown out by the aftermath of the explosion. His feathers were messy, and he had just flown back a little overwhelmed. "Fafnir, you give me down!" Lewis yelled. Fafnir, who was almost frightened by the bursting flames, was stunned for a long time, and reluctantly flew over and landed in front of Lewis. It also seemed to know that it had done something wrong, lowered its eyebrows, moved towards Lewis little by little, and looked up at Lewis from time to time with an expression like a child who had done something wrong. Lewis was not used to it, grabbed the root of Fafnir's wings and lifted it up, dangling and questioning. "I let you catch some small animals. Do you catch an eight-eyed giant spider to murder your master and me?" Fafnir let out an unconvincing cry, as if to say that the spider looked quite small. "Little fart, I let you catch some rats and rabbits. I didn't let you catch magical beasts." Lewis shook Fafnir vigorously, shaking it with Venus in the eye before stopping. It wasn't Lewis who vented, but Professor McGonagall was hurrying here. In addition to Professor McGonagall, there were some students who were alarmed by the explosion and wanted to see the excitement. "What's going on here?" Professor McGonagall's expression was nervous. "Why was there an explosion here just now?" "Sorry, Professor." Lewis took the initiative to stand up and said, "My owl brought an 8-eyed giant spider from the Forbidden Forest, and I had to use powerful magic to destroy it for the safety of Harry and me." "You wiped out the 8-eyed giant spider? Wait, you did that explosion just now?" Professor McGonagall asked in shock. "Yes, Harry can testify to that," Lewis replied. "What about the 8-eyed giant spider?" Professor McGonagall asked nervously. "The 8-eyed spider is a dangerous creature that loves to sneak up, and if it is not completely destroyed, it will be a disaster for Hogwarts students." "Eh? What do you look for it?" Lewis pointed to the remaining ashes on the ground. "There, you see, it's handled exceptionally cleanly." A gust of wind blew through, sweeping away the ashes on the ground and officially erasing the last traces of the 8-eyed giant spider. "Are you sure that 8-eyed giant spider was brought out of the Forbidden Forest by your owl and not appeared near the school?" Professor McGonagall did not ask about the explosion, but nervously asked about the 8-eyed giant spider. "Of course, I originally wanted to train Fafner's hunting skills, so I let him go to the Forbidden Forest to catch a small animal, but I didn't expect it to catch an 8-eyed giant spider," Lewis said helplessly, watching Fafner raise his head and slap it on the head with a proud look. "I didn't praise you." Fafner crestfallen. "Small animals?" The wrinkles on Professor McGonagall's face were twitching. "You call the 8-eyed giant spider a small animal?" Episode 67. This should not be the last. Although Lewis assures that the 8-eyed spider is from the Forbidden Forest, Professor McGonagall mobilizes the professors in the school to search the vicinity of the castle. She also specifically asked Hagrid to bring in Professor Sylvanus Keitelborn, who lives in the Forbidden Forest, and put him in charge of determining the tracks of the 8-eyed giant spider. "Don't worry, Michaeliva, there is no trace of the 8-eyed giant spider around the castle, not even the walking trace of the 8-eyed giant spider that was blown to ash. It was indeed caught and flew over." Professor Keitelborn rubbed his waist after carefully checking his surroundings. He was very old, his body was not as good as before. He used to be able to run around the mountain with magical beasts, but now he was a little tired to walk 2 more steps. "However, I suspected the existence of 8-eyed giant spiders in the Forbidden Forest before, but I have never seen them expand their territory, thinking that they have misjudged. It seems that it is not," the old professor said and coughed twice. Beside him was a restless Hagrid, not worried about the old professor's body, but about the discovery of his pets in the Forbidden Forest. But he stalked a male and a female pair of 8-eyed giant spiders in the Forbidden Forest, and now the Forbidden Forest is full of their children. However, he specially instructed the 8-eyed giant spider he raised to restrain his children, so those 8-eyed giant spiders who liked to expand their territory maintained the number of races and did not expand to other places. Perhaps it can also be said that the limit of their ability is there, and the Forbidden Forest is not their 8-eyed giant spider's own territory, and there are all kinds of dangerous creatures here. Although the 8-eyed giant spider is harmful to wizards because it is good at sneak attacks, it is not so deterrent to many magical animals with thick skin. What's more, there are basilisks hidden in the underground of Hogwarts. Other animals do not know. Hagrid's 8-eyed giant spider Aragog knows, that is the natural enemy of the 8-eyed giant spider. For the sake of its own race's small life, it will not take the initiative to approach Hogwarts Castle. "So this matter is over, right?" Professor Snape came over, slightly impatient. He had just been brewing a potion and ran out in a panic, not knowing what happened to the potion. "No problem for now, but about Mr. Wilson." Professor McGonagall looked at Lewis, who was chatting with Harry. "He wiped out the 8-eyed giant spider, didn't he?" "Then a plus," Snape said calmly without any embarrassment. "Even Muggle wizards were Slytherin students. JPG. Makes sense." Professor McGonagall had no opinion, and the other professors nodded in agreement. Lewis's performance in class left a lot of impression on the professors, and everyone liked this excellent student. It's just that Professor McGonagall feels that she still needs to give Lewis some warnings. The professors dispersed, and Professor McGonagall's fiery shaking disturbed the professors' rare leisure time, and now that they were fine, they couldn't wait to leave. "Mr. Wilson." Professor McGonagall walked towards Lewis. "It's all right, but I have to warn you, absolute. Don't let your owls go to the Forbidden Forest to catch critters anymore." "Good professor, this was not my intention, and I was taken aback by Fafner." Lewis knocked Fafner on the head and said, "I promise, Fafner will obey." "That's good." Professor McGonagall breathed a sigh of relief. Then Professor McGonagall also laughed. "It was thrilling, wasn't it, Harry?" Lewis watched Professor McGonagall leave, turned to Harry, and said, "That big spider almost landed on our heads." Harry was stuck. He didn't know whether to tell the truth or not. He always felt that the scene of Lewis destroying the spider just now was much more scary than the spider. "Lewis, what is an 8-eyed giant spider?" Harry asked with an awkward smile and a change of subject. "A very dangerous magical beast. They are on the same level as the fire dragon in the Ministry of Magic's classification." Lewis explains, it's not that they're as powerful as fire dragons, but because they're good at sneak attacks and don't dodge as easy as fire dragons. However, the eight-eyed giant spider is also a relatively valuable magical beast, and its venom can be sold for 100 galleons per pint. Lewis's voice suddenly interrupted, and Harry looked up curiously to see Lewis's distressed expression. I forgot that the venom of the eight-eyed giant spider can be sold for money. Lewis sighed and said regretfully, it's a big loss. This. Harry glanced at Lewis, and then at Fafnir, who was excited to hear Lewis's words, and suddenly felt that this would definitely not be the last time the eight-eyed giant spider appeared near Hogwarts Castle. On Sundays, the weather is rainy, and the Slytherin dormitories are particularly noisy. As Lewis left the dormitory, he could hear a broken male voice shouting, it's all fake, it's all skeletons, don't come over. It is said that he was also scared to pee. Lewis walked down the hallway, looking at the heavy rain outside the window, and yawned involuntarily. Rainy days always make people feel unmotivated, sleepy, and want to sleep, but after all, I have an appointment with someone, and it is not good to release pigeons. Lewis came to a relief of an eagle and looked left and right. That's where the Weasley twins said they were going to gather, but it looks like they haven't come over yet. I'm early? Lewis estimated the time, the place should be right. Suddenly there was a strange sound behind him, and Lewis looked back to find the eagle relief slowly parting, revealing a deep passageway, and Fred, who was holding a wand to illuminate, walked out of the passage. It's early. Fred was a little surprised to see Lewis come in. What is this place? Lewis followed behind Fred and asked, hidden room? It's just a secret passage, where George and I work on new products is in an empty classroom on the 7th floor, and it's the fastest way from here. Fred explained. Why don't you release the lighting charm? You just let it go, I can see it. Lewis can cast a lighting spell, but he can release a fireball that will explode. How do you know about the secret passages of Hogwarts? Lewis knowingly asked, of course he knew such an important thing as the Marauder's map. Because we often run around, we are familiar. Apparently Lewis and the twins are not close enough to tell each other secrets, and Fred is not telling the truth. After walking up a flight of stairs, the two came to a dead end, and Fred unhurriedly tapped the wall with his wand, and the wall parted in response. Episode 68. The study of magic must also use scientific methods. Lewis got out of the passage and looked back to see a moving portrait that looked like a knight. Thank you for opening the door for us. Fred gave a nondescript knightly salute to the knight, and the knight in the portrait also returned the salute. That guy is a fake knight obsessed with knightly stories, but you have to treat him like a real knight, or he will sometimes not open the door for you. Fred introduced. It's kind of fun. Lewis said. There are secret passages behind many of the portraits in the castle, but it's best not to use them if you are not familiar with them, especially during night tours, Fred said. I bet you don't know as well as Filch, and if you don't know how the exit opens, you are likely to be blocked in the secret passage by him. It seems that at this time, you must have been blocked before you became familiar with the secret passage. Lewis laughed. Indeed, but not now. We are more familiar with secret passages than Filch, and we also use the Phantom Curse. Filch is a squib, can't tell. Fred was very enthusiastic about teaching Lewis about night travel. If you can also use the Phantom Charm, just be careful of the Night Watch Professor. Thanks for the reminder. Lewis said casually. He has a snake charm, which is much more high-end than the so-called Phantom spell, and there will be no interference or sensing, or it is difficult for the magic of different systems to restrain each other. Not to mention the Night Patrol Professor, even Dumbledore may not be able to see through the stealth of the snake charm. Come on, here we are. Fred extinguished his wand and pointed to the classroom in front of him. Quick, George is still waiting for us. Hogwarts has a lot of empty classrooms, which is not to say that they are not used, but they are really not used. The 4 houses in one grade combined are only about 40 people, and the 7 years are 280, and the classrooms that are less than half of Hogwarts Castle are spread out, and there will always be a lot of ash left in the classrooms that have not been visited for a long time. These classrooms are often in remote corners of the upper floors, and no one really notices them. In the classroom, George Weasley was studying Lewis's magic powder, and it seemed that he had learned Fred's lesson without rubbing it out in a big way. There were no desks and chairs in the classroom, but the twins had prepared cushions intimately, one for each of them and one for Lewis. A large amount of magic materials were randomly thrown on the floor around George for easy access, but this made the classroom look dirtier, no less than a garbage dump. Here you are. George looked up and saw the two come over and get ready to start. Fred, continue the improvements to the portable swamp. Fred answered and ran over to study with George, and Lewis pulled the cushion, avoiding which materials to sit next to the two, and watched the twins do their research. It was agreed at the beginning, and Lewis could observe the Weasley brothers' manufacturing process, as long as it was not passed on, and he could ask any questions. Lewis only needs this. He is really worried that these two people really want to teach him only to find out that he can't do magic, so is he silent or extinguished? Watching George and Fred work together, doing something on a fist-sized projectile with the reaction of various materials combined with the power of magic, Lewis thought thoughtfully and felt a little inspired. Chi magic and magic are both magic, and chi magic also has a realm similar to potion alchemy, and he can use chi magic to make some props. The only difficulty was that he did not have the technology to manufacture magic items corresponding to chi magic, which was not part of the basics. If you want to transform the experience of alchemy into chi magic, you must have a good teacher with great vision. But the good teacher has not carved it yet. Hagrid only went to Diagon Alley today. It is estimated that he can bring the carving tools back tonight. Hogsmeade Village he has already visited, and there is nothing Lewis needs. Done. The two men worked tirelessly to tinker with it, and soon they loaded up the fist-sized projectile, which Fred was holding in circles in the classroom. Quick, experiment with it. George yelled in the back, get it out, dang dang. Freddie sang a song he didn't understand, pinched the projectile in his hand and threw it in the middle of the classroom. The projectile landed on the floor and suddenly bounced into a piece of silt and landed on the ground, and the rapid erosion of the floor under the expectant eyes of the Weasley twins had a tendency to turn that area into a swamp. However, this trend soon stopped, and the area that had been turned into a swamp gradually turned yellow and withered, and the city of 100 Years was a dry and cracked mud field. The twins, who had all planned to cheer, suddenly deflated. Failed again. Freddie sat on the ground dejectedly and didn't care about the dust on that floor. Yes, start again. George sighed too. Lewis, who was watching, blinked and asked. All of you do one at a time and experiment right away? Yes, so we know right away if that method will work. Fred replied. But isn't it difficult for you to compare? Your memory can guarantee that the props you make next time you won't make the same mistakes, so what about next time? Lewis asked. I think you can make multiple finished products at once as a comparison so that you can improve the method at any time and then document it. Sounds reasonable. George and Fred said at the same time. You're smart, Lewis. George said again. This is not my wisdom, this is the experimental method of Muggle scientific research methods, controlling all variables of the object of study, studying cause and effect. Lewis replied. Science? Studying magic in Muggle ways sounds like it off pure-blood wizards who hate Muggles, Fred said. Science is a research attitude, and orderly research is always more likely to produce results than messy troubles, and it allows your wisdom to be used more for creation than for dealing with chaos. Lewis walked over to where the twins had placed the materials and said, Don't underestimate Muggles, soon. Soon what? George and Fred asked suspiciously. Nothing. Lewis shook his head and looked down at the rudimentary material. Soon Muggles will enter the information age, when the relationship between wizards and humans will become further strained. Even with the Muggle expulsion curse, the gaps in those satellite photos would still attract Muggle attention in the face of the growing scarcity of the land. But it seems that wizards are not at all aware that the future is approaching, and even the wisest and greatest wizard, Dumbledore, is now only focused on the half-dead Dark Lord. Episode 69, Can a magician's deception be called a deception? The individual abilities of wizards are strong, but the civilized world of wizards is vulnerable. But even if the wizard civilization collapsed, each wizard lived his or her own, or small gatherings would have little effect on Lewis. Spend the morning watching the twins make props and then teaching them magic. Then in the afternoon, Lewis unceremoniously abandoned them. What is the matter of the three big old men mixing together all day, or find a girl? Unfortunately, after browsing the library, Lewis did not find Hermione, only saw Padma reading in the crowded library. Padma? Hermione wasn't with you? Lewis walked over and said hello. Lewis? Haven't seen you in a while. Padma raised her head and smiled at Lewis, but it's a bit rude to see one lady so eager to ask another lady. The reason you haven't seen me in a while is because I haven't seen Hermione in a while. Lewis stalls, what is she doing lately? I didn't do anything, normal class, normal study. Padma shook her head, but she seems to be avoiding you lately. You guys have a conflict? Nope. Lewis said innocently. Isn't it Hermione that she has a new friend? Padma blinked. She should have been close to the Gryffindor student recently, the legendary Harry Potter. Harry Potter? How did they meet? Probably started when the kind Hermione saw the lost savior who hadn't eaten breakfast for several mornings in a row. Padma gossiped. Didn't Hermione tell you? Didn't I say it? I haven't seen her in a while. Lewis was slightly irritable, but he quickly controlled his emotions. Do you need me to help you with a word? Padma asked thoughtfully. No, no need. Lewis shook his head and left the library. Padma watched Lewis leave, and a Ravenclaw girl next to him asked, Is he Lewis? That Merlin descendant? He's Lewis, but I don't know if he's not a descendant of Merlin. Padma said. The girl looked admiring. He is so handsome, especially his eyes, as clear as the starry sky. I don't know if he has a girlfriend. As far as I know, no, but he seems to have a heart. Padma said. Is that the reaction of the one who seems to belong is a little strange. Such an excellent boy is not easy to find. Is she not afraid of being snatched away at this time? I didn't expect the interference of fate to come so quickly, which made them meet. Lewis meditated as he walked down the corridor, and the students who met Lewis along the way would consciously give way to let Lewis pass. Lewis was still a little uncomfortable about Hermione still having a bump into Harry Potter and Ron Weasley, but he wasn't too sensitive, and Hermione, who had joined Ravenclaw, had a natural barrier with Harry Potter and Ron Weasley. Their relationship will certainly not be so close, but sharing secrets is always the fastest way to get closer, and Gryffindor, especially Gryffindor's Harry Potter and Ron Weasley, are all representatives of big mouths, and it is not a matter of conspiring loudly. About the news of the Philosopher's Stone, Hermione would know sooner or later, maybe she would already know by this time. With Hermione's curiosity, she would not let go of the opportunity to venture together. After all, Hermione also had the reckless nature of Gryffindor in essence. The disturbance and intervention of fate is really not willing to admit defeat. Lewis returned to the dormitory, and it was raining for the Quidditch team. Training was also terminated, and students who had completed their homework gathered in the common room to chat and play chess. And Lewis's 4 roommates didn't know whether it was for huddle warmth or simply for a good relationship, and the 4 of them sat in the corner with a girl and said something. Lewis stared meaningfully at his roommates and the not-so-honest Slytherin students he had marked, making sure they were all neat and not missing arms or legs, and then nodded in satisfaction. Lewis's strange gaze made the people he stared at uncomfortable, and there was always an illusion of cold legs. But fortunately, Lewis did not do anything out of the ordinary, and quietly walked back to the dormitory, which made the others breathe a sigh of relief. Lewis returned to his dormitory, to his bed, when a cloud of mercury rolled out from under the bed. Magic dress, moon spirit marrow. Because he didn't want to put the Horcrux in his storage space, and because he was worried that someone would touch Voldemort's Ravenclaw demon without knowing what he seemed to move, Lewis left the lunar spirit essence as a defense, specifically to break the dog legs of the guy who didn't know whether he was alive or dead. That's why Lewis stares at other people's legs, before going back to the dorm. Continuing to disperse the lunar essence and watch the Ravenclaw crown, Lewis walked over to the table and began to write the letter. Although Padma said that he could help Lewis bring a message, Lewis first felt that what he was going to say was inconvenient for Padma to read, and the second was that he was worried that Padma would tamper with his words. Judging from the attitude of the first meeting, Padma is still a little cautious, and Lewis does not want to have any misunderstanding. The content of the letter was simple. It was all about the alchemy he had seen in the Forbidden Book area, and he accidentally mentioned a name, Nicholas Flamel. Then Lewis also revealed a little of his prophetic talent. As for whether Hermione would believe herself, Lewis did not suspect this, as a skilled fraud magician, this bit of confidence is still there. The only point was whether Hermione would tell Harry and Ron about it. Prophesying such a thing can sometimes be taken as very strong corroboration, and if Hermione told Harry and Ron about Gryffindor characteristics, the news would soon spread throughout the castle. At that time, gifted for prophecy will also become evidence of his identity as a descendant of Merlin, and it is not Lewis himself who has declared it, which is more credible. This can also be regarded as a multi-prosperous one. The thief does not go empty, the letter is written, and it is too disrespectful to deceive one side if you do not by the way. Fraudsters. Ah no, isn't it a magician who cheats? Can a magician's deception be called a deception? Episode 70, the second stage of the task, completed first. After writing the letter, Lewis opened the cage and released the eager Fafnir. Of course, elves are used to deliver letters, and elves, magical animals, are born with the ability to use the trail curse, a magic that finds people's locations, and Hermione can't hide from him anymore. Louise can't hide from elves. At that time, this seemingly informative letter, but in fact not mentioning anything detailed, will definitely fish out the curious Hermione. Even if Lewis really inadvertently offended Hermione and made she upset. He wrapped the letter and brought it to Fafnir's mouth, who took it lightly and looked at Lewis expectantly. Because the Slytherin dormitory has no windows, it is completely underground and close to the Black Lake, which makes it very troublesome to send and receive letters, and if you want to deliver letters, you have to let the owl send it after going out, and you have to pick it up when you come back. Unlike Ravenclaw, where dormitories are located on the upper floors, owls don't need to go through security, answer riddles, to find the person who needs to deliver the letter. By the way, when I come back, I will catch a small animal on the way. Well, just bring it back last time, remember not to kill it, sneaky one, don't let others find out and hear it. Lewis patted Fafnir on the head and admonished. Fafnir exclaimed, amusing himself, because it was the first time he was doing his job. As for catching small animals, that's entertainment. I'll come out to pick you up at night. Lewis patted Fafnir to show encouragement and planned to let Fafnir out, but he did not expect to be dropped by someone in the common room as soon as he left the dormitory. Is something wrong? Lewis looked up at the person in front of him, a little familiar, as if he had seen it somewhere. Oh, remember, it's the critic who said he was so astringent. What's his name? I. The man's face was tangled, and his protruding front teeth squeezed his mouth like an ape. You don't want me, you first, let's say what your name is. Lewis touched Fafner's back feathers. I'm okay. My name is Graham Monty. The Slytherin looked stunned. I'm here to apologize. Oh? Apologize, just say why, Lewis said casually. I shouldn't say you're so astringent, please lift my curse. Monty looked aggrieved, but said in a low voice. He now dreams of his favorite type of woman rushing towards him as soon as he sleeps, and then turning into a rapidly decomposing corpse the moment he touches him, gradually turning into a skeleton and haunting him. This situation began last night, and by noon today he wanted to catch up on sleep but was awakened by that nightmare, and what was even more terrifying was that the nightmare was extremely long. Obviously he felt that he had been tortured for several hours, but only a few minutes had passed when he woke up. He couldn't sleep well at all, and what was even more terrifying was that he was worried that he would become afraid of women if he went on like this. He now has a faint feeling of this, and a few more nightmares are afraid that he will die alone. Oh, you said this. Lewis and Yen, you patted Monty's shoulder. It's true that you don't say that. I forgot. How can I be such a careful person? Go to bed with confidence and make sure you don't have nightmares. He really almost forgot, not that he forgot what this person said about him, but that he had taken revenge on such a person. Because this retaliation does not involve any fraud, there is no system prompt, and Lewis forgot about the illusion after arranging the illusion, and if the person did not stand up and apologize, he would not have remembered. Really? Are you sure? Monty asked excitedly. Of course, I am a very reasonable person. I will not offend people if they do not offend me. Lewis smiled gently, but said politely, be good. What should I do now? Stay out of my way. Yes. Yes and yes. Montour was pardoned and ran away without saying a word. Then he was surrounded by a crowd of people, muttering, not knowing what he was saying. You can't still discuss how to deal with me, can you? Don't have a long memory? Lewis muttered to himself and left the lounge. Outside, Lewis told Fafner where he would meet, and then released Fafner out. At this moment, a system prompt suddenly appeared in front of Lewis's eyes. You completed the mission stage 2. Your Merlin descent has been established to gain recognition from all Slytherins in school. The first stage has not been completed. The mission reward will be delayed after the completion of the first stage, and the settlement of fraud points will proceed normally. Your bloodline scam defrauded 69 Slytherin students. Far-reaching scam. You have earned 34,500 fraud points, and your current point is 41,420. Unexpectedly, I didn't expect that the second stage of the mission would be completed earlier than the first stage, and it can only be said that when the Slytherin students first promoted Lewis's bloodline, they didn't expect Lewis to admit it, let alone Lewis to give people the illusion that he would really create nightmares through illusions. As a result, because it was most easy to feel the difference in Lewis around Lewis, the result was that their group of rumors were not confident first. And the Monty who promoted Lewis's astringency was the last straw that broke the camel's back. He just said a good astringency and almost couldn't be astringent in his life, and the terrible nightmare almost scared him out of feminophobia. Now the Slytherin students had to believe the lie they had made. Obviously, in terms of difficulty, it should be the most difficult to believe among students, but now I am forced to believe it. But the students of the other houses are firmly in disbelief. Do they take it for fun, or do they feel that there is a lack of evidence? Lewis looked at the dark clouds in the sky and wondered if he wanted to read the entire infinite moon to promote his bloodline. This kind of self-talk feels so low. Fafner spread his wings and flew high. Lewis looked up at it away, and suddenly heard another owl chirping, and an owl that looked a little strange flew towards Lewis and landed beside him. Huh? Looking for mine? Lewis was stunned for a moment, and when he saw the small cloth bag in the owl's beak, he remembered what he had bought by Tohag. Tools for engraving. In addition to the tools used for carving, the strange owl handed Lewis a letter. The letter was sent by Hagrid, and it said that Lewis had done everything he had asked him to do, and that if Lewis needed materials for practice, he could take them from him politely, and he had a lot of good wood brought from the Forbidden Forest. What a nice man. Lewis touched the owl's head, handed it a few nat as a tip and watched it leave. With the tools, go back and find some materials. You can prepare to carve your own teacher, and then you can see how far the most magical of the 12 spells can be dead. Episode 71. Finalize the image of Hermes. In addition to the professional tools for carving, there are more than a dozen galleons in the cloth bag. This is naturally not Hagrid sending money to Lewis at a loss, but the large worn-out dragon skin that Lewis threw to Hagrid and asked him to sell by the way, which is also one of the things that Hagrid asked him. With the guard of the moon spirit essence, Voldemort Ravenclaw has no room for power at all, and mercury is a relatively precious magical material even in the eyes of wizards, which can isolate the erosion of mana, and the effect is no worse than dragon skin. As a gift created by the special power, magic, of another world, the isolation ability of the moon spirit essence liquid is stronger than ordinary mercury, and all dragon skins are useless, so it is more appropriate to let Hagrid exchange money. It's time to give Hagrid some gifts, and although he doesn't care much about helping others, his attitude is still very important. Lewis weighed these galleons and muttered to himself. Lewis counted that the dragon skin was only sold for 17 galleons, which was also something that could not be helped. The dragon skin was too old for one reason, and Hagrid would not do business was another reason. But dragon skin does not want cost, pure profit, do not want in vain. Back in the dormitory, Lewis set about designing a statue of Hermes. He wrote and drew with his own pencil on a piece of paper, occasionally with a quill to sketch the edges, and in a few moments he completed a portrait of Hermes. Because he has practiced painting, his drawing skills are not bad. This portrait of Hermes is a combination of the statue of Hermes that Lewis recalled seeing in the past, as well as some descriptions from mythological stories plus his own understanding of appearance. It has strong muscles and shapes, wears ancient Greek clothing, has an infinite symbol of aperture on its head, has strong legs and is good at running, wearing winged shoes, and holding a double snake staff while running and smashing it forward with two snake staffs. These are all super reproductions by Lewis that reminded him of some information he had accidentally seen in his previous life, otherwise he would not have been able to draw it based on what he had seen and heard at the age of 11. Hermes, also known as the triple grade Hermes, is himself a multifaceted god formed by the fusion of several myths. What Mercury guardians, the gods of business, debate information language literature, fraudsters and thieves are countless. Because of the complex composition, Lewis was also a little worried about the influence of appearance on the power of Hermes awakened, so he specially selected ancient Greek civilization image, primitive image, occult symbol, tarot card image, double snake scepter, the concept of alchemical yin and yang, to create Hermes. Outwardly speaking, there was no problem with this Hermes, but Lewis was lost in thought when he looked at the portrait with the comparison. No, it's a little dangerous. Lewis muttered and crumpled the painted portrait and threw it aside, intending to paint another one. Hermes is a god, good at deception and good at running, and the rat charm revival will perfectly replicate this, and Lewis is likely to create an indelible trouble for himself. Magicians like to plan ahead to prevent accidents in performances, and they need to be more vigilant about God than performances. So Hermes cannot be left with the ability to act. So Lewis abruptly erased Hermes' body, leaving only a head, but Lewis had problems drawing this head. It is difficult for him to show the hallmarks of Hermes on a head, so that even if he finally carves the statue, it will only be the head of an unknown living human, and it will not even accommodate the characteristics of Hermes' prototypes, let alone magical and alchemy. If you want the rat charm to successfully revive a person who wants to recover, the first condition is a distinct identity. In the original work, the rat charm has revived a total of life other than the Holy Lord. The first is the most famous Saint Lope. The author considers himself Liu Bei, whose rat charm activated his statue on display in the museum. The second is Super Moose, a fictional anime character in anime, a moose that can talk and fly. The third is the Nomi Police, the same kind as the previous one, but specially, a larger soldier has been resurrected later. The fourth, Quetzalcoatl, this one is also evidence that Lewis believes that the rat charm can revive Hermes, although the god is quite good, but the pressure is high. These four are symbolic objects in themselves, their appearance determines their identity, and there is also a cognition that is acceptable to everyone, so Lewis believes that Hermes is useless, and it must have enough characteristics recognized by rat charms, or cognitive characteristics accepted by most people. A head was not enough to leave features, and Lewis planned to draw a bust to see it. But the effect is the same, without the body, Hermes' identity cannot be highlighted. Looks like I need a little inspiration. Lewis hesitated and took out Sherlock Holmes' pipe again. The feeling of smoking a pipe is unpleasant, and although it works well, it takes at least a few seconds to smoke it once before it is healed by a horse charm. I really don't know how Holmes smoked this addiction. Lewis lit his pipe and took a sharp sip, and countless inspirations burst into his mind amid the cough. There it is. Lewis's eyes lit up, and he quickly used a horse charm to heal his lungs and picked up the first manuscript from the ground. Designer, Party A chooses the first set of plans. At the same time as Party A and Party B, Lewis shook his head to shake out the strange ideas in his mind, unfolded the portrait, looked at the portrait with Hermes' most distinctive features, lifted the pen, and made a fierce stroke on the neck of the portrait. Hermes has been beheaded. That should be fine. Lewis looked at the portrait and nodded with satisfaction. Since a single head cannot resuscitate Hermes, it is not long before the head of the statue of Hermes is broken off and resuscitated alone. It's really worthy of Sherlock Holmes' pipe, this inspiration, absolutely impossible. Lewis put down the painting and looked at the time of the antique clock hanging on the wall in the dormitory. Almost, it's time for Fafnir to come back. Lewis put away the drawings, threw away the useless scraps, and prepared to leave the dormitory. Although the curfew was still there, several people in the dormitory had no intention of stopping Lewis, and they were even a little happy. Great, this nightmare is gone, and they can sleep peacefully. Lewis knew what his roommate thought. He came to the pre-agreed location, and before he reached the position, he heard the screeching sound of fingernails scratching the floor, or 8 paws scratching at the same time. In the dark corner, I saw an 8-eyed giant spider the size of a millstone lying on the floor. The furry 8 arthropods swiped desperately, the 8 eyeballs reflected a faint cold light in the dark, and the sharp jaws made a metal-like friction sound. When it noticed Lewis's approach, the 8-eyed giant spider immediately stopped its activities, and the instinct of sneak attack made it subconsciously enter a hunting state, and even forgot to stand on its back to comb its feathers. Fafnir still performed well, catching a large spider bigger than the afternoon without any injuries. Episode 72, Impatient Filch. It's a picture that can shock anyone who is afraid of spiders on the spot. The moment Lewis saw it, he almost couldn't help but blow it up with a dragon charm. Why not use a faster pig charm? The scope of that thing is small, there is no way to vaporize the spider on the spot, looking troublesome. Fortunately, Lewis was mentally prepared in advance and restrained his instincts. 8-eyed giant spider, this is a valuable magical beast, I just don't know what those wizards want its venom for. Lewis looked at the struggling 8-eyed giant spider, did not immediately take the venom, but manipulated the moon spirit essence to separate a ball and wrap it up. Fafnir, go back to sleep. Lewis opened the password door for Fafnir and watched it fly in, and walked towards the room of demand with a large and a small cloud of moon spirit essence. It was curfew time, and the dark castle corridors were slightly gloomy. Squib Filch wanders the castle with an oil lamp like a tireless ghost, trying to find innocent passers-by and drag him into the abyss of pain. At least for most night-wandering students, because Filch, who knows the secret passage and is haunted, is indeed such a ghost, much more frightening than those ghosts. But Lewis thought that this squib might not be much better than those little wizards. Seesaw Filch's slightly trembling hand. He was probably scared too. As a Muggle, facing those students was like facing a bare child with a gun, although there were school rules to suppress, but the devil knew if they would give Filch a shot. As a squib, he has no power to fight back, and just a stun spell can break several ribs. A squib has to live in the School of Magic and Wizardry at Hogwarts, and he is eaten by jealousy all day, and looking at the little wizard who is learning magic is like looking at an enemy, and he really can't understand what he wants. Lewis sighed inwardly. If he didn't have the system, as a Muggle, he wouldn't have the chance to walk into this school, but the feeling of being a traverser and missing Hogwarts would probably make him crazy like Filch. Even crazier. Just when Lewis sighed, Filch, who was about to walk by Lewis quickly, suddenly stopped, held the oil lamp and looked at Lewis, and actually walked towards him step by step. Lewis raised his eyebrows, not panicking. He didn't believe Filch could see through his snake spell stealth. Then the reason why he came here is very simple. Lewis looked back at the huge portrait and quickly dodged to the side as Filch reached for it. There are no moving figures in this huge portrait, only a tireless horse grazing. Filch's hand touched the horse's back a few times, the horse snorted comfortably, and slowly walked to the grassland portrait next door to graze with a group of zebras. The portrait silently opens to reveal a door that leads to nowhere. Apparently it was a secret passage that Lewis had not noticed before standing there. Of course, this also has the reason why he did not use mental power to explore the way. If spiritual power acts on people, then people will have obvious feelings. Hogwarts portraits are alive, and seem to be able to communicate with each other, and even run to Dumbledore's headmaster's office to speak. Therefore, just in case, Lewis generally does not use mental power to touch the portrait so as not to be suspected of being discovered, so he did not detect the existence of the secret passage. Watching Filch slip into the secret passage and slowly close the horse that ran back to graze, Lewis could only sigh at the magic of Hogwarts. How did the seemingly intelligent horse be drawn? And it seems to be a magic that is easy to popularize, otherwise Hogwarts would not have this kind of portrait all over the school. Lewis shook his head, stopped thinking about the question, and walked towards the moving staircase with 2 balls of moon spirit essence. It's the easiest place to get lost, but it's also a place to get straight to any floor, but the moving staircase won't necessarily take you to the floor you want to go to, which means you'll have to go around half the castle and take the other stairs. Missing the moving staircase was inevitable. Lewis looked at the long staircase that turned halfway through, and looked at the 2 clouds of mercury at his feet with disgust. This month's spiritual essence is really slow. Lewis didn't want to make a detour and didn't plan to make a detour. The shadow of the chicken charm lit up under his eyes, and a floating force supported himself and 2 balls of moon spirit essence directly to the position on the 8th floor. Just as Lewis landed, he suddenly saw a flash of light. Lewis frowned, the snake charm invisibility erased himself and the figure of the moon spirit essence was Filch. He held the oil lamp and walked towards this side. It turned out that it was a secret passage to the 8th floor. Lewis thought thoughtfully as he watched Filch walk forward. There is the direction of the demand, but it doesn't matter, just use illusion to drive it away. Lewis followed Filch and wandered all the way, and soon came to the tapestry where the trolls beat the fool Barnabas. At the same time, the black corridor opposite also had a white light. I saw Flitwick, the head of Ravenclaw, Professor of Charms, walk over with a lit wand. Mr. Filch, I didn't see the student you said. Professor Flitwick's voice is a bit shrill and characteristic of the leprechaun. Maybe you just misheard. No, Professor, I'm sure I heard those two damn twins. They're around here. Maybe they used the phantom curse, Professor. Filch said excitedly. You can use magic to make them appear. Well, it turned out that the trembling just now was not fear, but to catch the excitement of the night tour students. Listening to Filch, he was chasing someone with a clear goal in the first place and driving the other party into the encircled trap. And this person is most likely a Weasley twin, who are around now. Lewis looked around, but the field of vision was empty, and there were no other threads. Not involving the subject of fate above his head, Lewis's eye of fate observation can see any thread of fate on his body, and there is no thread here, so naturally there is no one to hide. Professor Flitwick's brows furrowed exaggeratedly. He had always been a kind professor, and he had always turned a blind eye to night travel, and it was difficult for him to understand why Filch was so persistent in catching night tours. But Filch's request he could not refuse, at this time in line with the school rules of the matter. Okay, then, rush. Professor Flitwick waved his wand, and the magical light against the phantom curse spilled around. Filch looked around impatiently, his eyes like sharp owls. Episode 73, The Way to Fool the Demand-Responding House. The light of magic shone on Lewis's body, but it was of no use, and the snake charm was not a magic that could be lifted by the counterspell of the phantom curse. But there are no twins around. You see, Mr. Filch, they are not here, said Professor Flitwick, and I can guarantee that no one will be able to escape under my nose, even if they will use the illusion curse. Professor, you are afraid that there is no one under your tall nose. Lewis held back a smile and shook his head. The implication of Professor Flitwick's words is that even if there is a student night trip, he must have escaped from Filch's side, and Professor Flitwick is also holding back, which can make Filch not sleep well all night. But this is indeed the truth. How could Filch, a squib, think that he could surround the students who would have the phantom curse? He couldn't see through the phantom curse at all. I think the twins are probably playing with Filch, deliberately pretending to be surrounded and then taking the opportunity to escape. But Filch wanted to say something, but was interrupted by Professor Flitwick. Well, it's not early, Student Filch, you should also go back to rest, your age can't support you to stay up late like this. Professor Flitwick raised his wand and turned to leave. I'm sorry, I'm going to go first. Looking at the professors departing back, Filch's face turned blue and purple, and finally turned away fiercely. Silence returned to the corridor, and Lewis confirmed that both professors were leaving and was ready to open the room of demand. A room for potions. Lewis silently passed by 3 times, but there was no smooth door on the wall. Lewis touched the wall and wondered. The only reason the room of requirement is not responding is that it is being used, and it is impossible for a room to express 2 needs at the same time, so it will not appear doors. But who will be in it at this time? Suddenly Lewis thought of a possibility. Those 2 straight into the room of demand? They didn't run away? Lewis frowned and looked at the bare walls, somewhat incomprehensible. He's talking about the Weasley twins. Say that you learned the phantom curse? They also have Marauder's map, which can all be blocked. How many dishes is this? The operation is real. Forget it, talk to them. The professor and Filch have left, let them vacate the room of demand. Lewis intends to find the room they entered. It was simple, according to the situation at the time, they just wanted a room where they could hide. Unless they already know that there is a function of the room of necessity, or that it is not them. Just try it. Lewis is planning to activate the door of the demand room with a place to hide, the same appeal that allows someone to use the demand room to open the door. But just as Lewis had finished a round trip and was about to take the 3rd trip, he stopped and looked at the bare wall with interest. There are people in it now, and they are still in a state where they can hide, so what is the state of the room where the sundries were stored now? What happens if you break into a person in that state? Lewis was a little flustered, because he had marked a crystal ball when he left the utility room earlier, and he could teleport directly into it. The room of necessity is a quantum state-like existence. No one knows its state until someone officially has a demand, but its state is fixed after someone enters it. So what happens if a person forcibly enters a responsive house in another state while the room is fixed in one state? Lewis's eyes lit up. Then there is a good chance that the room of necessity will produce some kind of mistake. That way he can activate the perfect draw and the task will be completed. However, Lewis was still a little hesitant. After all, this act was suspected of death, and no one knew whether the utility house in that state would be dangerous. Although it won't die, it's a headache if you get into any disgusting trouble. Lewis frowned and thought about countermeasures. As for the safety of the twins, Lewis naturally ignored it. If there is really danger, save it when it is encountered, specifically to rescue. Don't joke, Lewis does not have the interest in being a hero. Suddenly he remembered something that he had ignored for a long time. Lewis reached out and fumbled in the storage space, and after a while, he pulled out a pale gold ticket with a wonderful pattern. One-time stand-in experience ticket. Lewis subconsciously shouted out this sentence and laughed. It's like a blue tanuki. Lewis shook his head to shake off the strange idea and looked at the prop in his hand. The one-time avatar experience role allows users to have the opportunity to experience the avatar one at a time, but unfortunately it is disposable, otherwise it must be at least perfect level to be withdrawn. The substitute is completely controlled by the master, and can also be classified as a puppet, although the injury of the substitute will react to the owner synchronously, but Lewis is not afraid of injury, as long as there is something more troublesome than damage. Even if there are some weird things that horse charms can't handle, when the time comes, wrap around the substitute, and when the time comes, it will disappear along with the substitute from the experience ticket. How good. Use. Lewis activated the experience ticket, and as the fire ignited the experience ticket, an active force poured into Lewis's body. He felt that his huge spiritual power was mobilized and condensed, forming a big cocoon behind him, and within the cocoon, it seemed that there was a rhythm of life. Suddenly, a lilac arm pierced a large cocoon and came out of it. The hand was slender, and it seemed to have little strength, and the arm was inlaid with light blue irregular crystals, dazzling and noble. As the stand-in inside the cocoon awakened, he slowly tore the cocoon open completely, allowing himself to be completely born in this world. This is a stand-in who is 1.9 meters tall and wears a top hat. His body is wrapped in a red curtain, and his lilac body seems to be looming under the curtain. The most special thing about his face is a vortex without any organs, and in that vortex there seem to be countless faces flashing. The stand-in stood quietly in front of Lewis, very quiet without control, and Lewis did not feel any signs of his wisdom. It seems that it is not the kind of self-conscious substitute, which is fortunate. There is no guilt in the manipulation, and there will be no opportunity to inexplicably worry about whether his substitute will kill himself or self-doubt or something. Welcome to this world for the time being, my stand-in. Lewis held out his hand as if greeting a new acquaintance. Then under the control of Lewis, his substitute also slowly stretched out his hand and shook it with him. Like a puppeteer performing a puppet show, the stand-in belonging to Lewis has officially arrived. Episode 74, Lewis's Stand-in. The stand-in, out of JoJo's Bizarre Adventures, is the embodiment of one's spiritual strength. Each stand-in has the ability to interfere with matter, from weak willows to wind to rollers. In addition to this uneven basic ability, each avatar has its own special ability. In general, this special ability needs to be groped by the person who has the stand-in. Lewis is different. He is system activated, with his own instructions. Stand-in, Faceless Phantom, Destructive Power, C, Speed, B, Range Distance, A, Sustainability, A, Precision, A, Growth, C. This is the six-dimensional panel familiar with Lewis's stand-in. The destructive power represents the degree of interference of the stand-in on the substance. To put it bluntly, how much strength there is. C represents the same strength as a strong adult. It seems that Lewis's stand-in can't help Whaler. The speed is B, which is approximately equal to the speed at which the cheetah runs. Range is the range of activity of the substitute. A is the theoretical value of a certain value of the substitute, which can also mean no upper limit. The range of the Faceless Phantom is A, and his range of activity is unlimited. Continuity refers to the ability of the stand-in to launch the limit. A means that there is no interval precision. A, error-free operation, which Faceless Phantom seems to inherit some of Lewis's advantages. As for growth, it refers to the potential of the stand-in and the ability that has not yet been released, and the C of the Faceless Phantom obviously has nothing to grow. As for his abilities. Ability 1, Faceless, can change into anyone. The more you understand, the more real it is, and at the same time you will have 50% of the other party's ability effect and physical fitness. If you become yourself, you can attach 70% of your special abilities and physical qualities to the substitute. Ability 2, Substitute Magic, swap the position of the avatar and the body at any time. Ability 3, Thriller Mirror Ghost, the stand-in sneaks into the mirror and imitates the appearance and movements of the person looking in the mirror. When the two move the same, the stand-in will switch positions with the target to replace the existence of the other party for 24 hours. Ability 4, Physical Avatar Body, because of the super mental power of the avatar messenger. Lewis, the avatar can be seen by non-avatar messengers, or you can actively choose to hide your body. Dexterous, convenient, and has special abilities that are both usable and gorgeous. Good luck. Lewis touched his chin while the Faceless Phantom opposite him made the same move. Such a stand-in is also suitable for exploring the way, but unfortunately this is only an experience version. I don't know when I can draw the worm arrow. Worm arrows are special props that can give others the ability to substitute themselves. As long as people with talent, if pierced by it, they will gain power, and those without talent will die because of this. Lewis estimates that this prop that can mass-produce a system is at least perfect level, and possibly even legendary level. After all, every stand-in has infinite possibilities, such as Dior Brando's The world has the ability to stand still in time, and these abilities have returned. Okay, the district is exploring the current glitter area. Lewis controls the faceless phantom and transforms its body into Brando. Messy blonde hair, arrogant posture, muscular body, and bloody aura from vampires. With Lewis's current memory, it is simply not too easy to recall the anime images he has watched in the past. Looking at the familiar vampire in front of him, Lewis moved slightly, and his perspective switched to this body. The sudden elevation of the field of vision made Lewis a little uncomfortable, but fortunately, it did not last long. Well, the world. Lewis controlled the simulated Dior Brando's body and used the power of a stand-in. As the sound fell, the color of the surrounding scenery faded into a pale gray, the whole world froze at this moment, the clock stopped turning, and time stopped at this moment. A golden illusory stand-in floats quietly behind Dior Brando, which is Dior Brando's stand-in world, and he also activates his abilities and time stops. But the pause lasted only 2 seconds, and soon the color of everything was restored and everything was back to its original state, but the world remained behind Dior Brando. Stand-in with stand-in, cow batch. Sure enough, because the stand-in is also an ability, the faceless phantom can also use their stand-in ability when simulating the stand-in messenger, but unfortunately it only has 50% of the strength. Lewis's version of Dior showed a thoughtful look, and the evil gaze did not look like a good person. It's a pity that the teleportation has to read the seconds, otherwise it is safer to teleport to the responsive house while the time stops. Lewis said with some regret. Some of them are not picked. Lewis left a teleportation mark on himself, and then manipulated the faceless phantom to launch the skill teleportation. The pale blue glow turned into a cascading aperture under the feet of Dior Brando, and 4 seconds later, Lewis with his perspective attached to the faceless phantom felt a light in his eyes, and in the blink of an eye he appeared in the utility room. It's just that not long after he appeared here, before he could take in the changes around him, a pile of debris from top to ceiling suddenly collapsed. You completed the task fooling the room of demand, fool the object special, you don't get fraud points. You unlock the perfect draw, each draw costs 2,000 fraud points. The room was shaking, and the violent shaking was so violent that Lewis didn't even have time to look at the same cue, and when he looked up, he saw a huge crack running through the roof, as if something had forcefully pierced the roof and was merging with it. A large number of debris fell from the surrounding debris pile, and was cleanly kicked aside by the world behind him, as a violent stand-in for the speed AA. The power of the world to deal with these debris can be said to be the old lady blowing her nose, holding a handle. But it still looks a bit dangerous here. Lewis did not hesitate, since he had achieved his goal. He went first, and immediately activated the teleportation mark left on Lewis's body, and the aperture reappeared, seeing that he was about to teleport the faceless phantom out. At this moment, a pile of debris fell from the cracked roof, and Lewis looked up and was surprised to find that a small, secret-like house merged with the roof at a strange angle, and the debris fell out of that house. The point is that 2 acquaintances in that house were cautiously looking out of the notch probe and saw Lewis just in time. No, they see Dior Brando. Lewis smiled wildly at the 2, and then disappeared into the utility room with a flash of light. Episode 75. So what is Peter Pettigrew? The faceless phantom suddenly appeared to Lewis's side, and then was slightly trembled by the wall in front of Lewis, and the problem in the room seemed to be affected. In the outside world, fortunately, the earth-shattering changes did not show up outside, so it seems that the changes in the responsive house are probably still under control. And from the analysis of the picture seen by the faceless phantom before leaving, the situation at that time was probably that 2 rooms with people at the same time were forcibly crumpled together, and there were no other consequences, then the Weasley's twins should not be in danger. Just as Lewis was analyzing reasonably, a crooked door appeared on the wall, which opened by itself, and then 2 people were spat out from inside. The sense of picture is so strong that Lewis really can't think of any adjectives other than spit it out. At the moment of spitting it out, Lewis's eyes looked through the door and found that the inside was being quickly restored, and it looked like it would be restored to its original state in less than half a minute. George and Fred rolled on the ground a few times just to Lewis's feet, and the 2 of them lay on their backs on the ground and saw Lewis's playful expression. Good evening too, it looks like you've just had an interesting adventure. Lewis said. Lewis? How could you be here? The twins didn't mean to get up at all and just lay on the floor. Well, we asked a silly word, you must be on a night tour here. You are right, we have just experienced a magical adventure, you must not believe me, we just. Fred was as tired as his twin brother, but the mental excitement made him reluctant to stop. However, before he could finish speaking, Lewis interrupted him. You guys came to the room of requirement to avoid Filch's capture? What's the room of demand? George and Weasley turned to look at each other and said in unison, you know that place just now? Of course, I found out here early on. Lewis spread his hands. I was going to use this place as a place to practice magic, but I didn't expect you to find out. It was an accident. That's right, an accident. The twins were lying on the ground to rest, and got up, today we just went out and met Filch, who forced him all the way to the 8th floor, and there was no time to use the phantom body charm. It's all to blame George, his phantom spell is too unskilled. How kind you said me, you were too scared to use it at that time. Seeing that the two were about to fight, Lewis could only mediate. If I don't stop, I'll call the professor over. Fred and George glared at each other and then at Lewis. You can't do that, you're also swimming at night. Fred laughed. No, 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 Lewis waved his finger. My roommates can attest that I'm in the dorm. No way, they should hate you to death. It is impossible to help you perjury. George retorted. They do hate me, but they are very knowledgeable and obedient. Lewis spread his hands and said, those who disobey are more obedient after receiving education. Oh my God, is this guy a demon? Fred whispered to George. Yes, it's scary, but I still want to say well done. George nodded and said. Looking at the two who were muttering, Lewis smiled slightly and said, are you two okay? If it's okay, get out of here. After hearing this, the twins looked at each other and asked, tell us about the demand house, right? Yes, we're curious. The two were not at all frightened by what had just happened, and they actually wanted to go in again, which was really worthy of Gryffindor. This can't work, the secret that belongs to me at this time, believe me, it's not easy to get in there, you just hit it by mistake, it's hard to go in next time. Lewis said casually. George and Fred looked at each other and muttered a few words, then nodded to each other. We exchange our secrets with you. George said. With that, he took out a thick piece of parchment from his arms and handed it to Lewis. What is it? Lewis said with his mouth, but in fact he knew what this thing was. Night artifact, Marauder's map. At this time, Harry Potter's father and his fox friends, realistic description, make magical items that can see everyone's movements within the confines of Hogwarts Castle, unless that person uses a shielding spell to keep himself disappearing. But in that case, even elves can't find each other, which is very inconvenient, so basically no one will be like Wit. This is the Marauder's map, and George and I are going to give this to you. Fred said, picking up his wand to help Lewis open the map, pointing to it and saying, I solemnly declare that I will not do anything good. Me too. George whispered on the sidelines. As the spell took effect, a line of handwriting appeared on the parchment. Moonface, Wormtail, Bigfoot board and pointed fork for you gentlemen, Maraudable map. Then a large area of ink appeared on the map, and the ink was combined into one word after another, and finally formed the map. A very complete and detailed map, and the names of the people who are walking. Everyone within Hogwarts will be displayed in real time, and there are also some secret passages that can enter and exit. George said. We know the secret passage by this, and we have not been caught since we had it. Fred said proudly. Except this time. Lewis raised his eyes and complained. Okay, but today was an accident. Fred shrugged, but there's no room on the map, and the person who made the map hasn't been here, maybe. Lewis looked at the map, then set his eyes on the Gryffindor dormitory. Marauder's map, a magical prop, can even be said to be the original author's hanging. It is difficult to imagine that a school student can make such a powerful prop. The Weasleys got the map and started playing with Filch and memorizing the secret passage along the way, but they ignored the most important effect of this thing. That is to find someone. Next to the names of Harry Potter and Ron Weasley, the name of Peter Pettigrew floats next to it. Lewis looked at George and Fred with strange eyes, and said in his heart that these two could not have noticed that their brother had been following a strange name. Is detonation in advance a fool of fate? It's worth a try. I said too. Lewis said in a strange tone, do you know Peter Pettigrew? Who is that? Do you know George? Don't know, the twins denied. If you don't know, that means he's not a Gryffindor student, right? Lewis asked. Of course, we know all the Gryffindors in school. The two brothers said proudly. Then why is there someone in Harry Potter's dormitory who doesn't belong to Gryffindor? Lewis spread out the map and pointed to the names on it. What? The twins were stunned for a moment, looked where Lewis was pointing, and sure enough, they saw the name of Peter Pettigrew. I guess this map shouldn't be so error-prone, right? Otherwise you wouldn't trust it so much, Lewis said, so what is the point of this Peter Pettigrew?